Hi, welcome back to Random Reading Pathways. I'm Matt, and I have a tag that I've been meaning to get to, so appropriately titled is the I'll get around to it later tag. I haven't had a chance to do this one yet, so I was tagged by a few different channels to do this one. I believe it was Shannon at Shannon's Shelf, it was Trav at Trav's Bookshelf, and also John at Must Read More. So thanks to all you guys for tagging me, and yeah, I have the prompts here for the get around to it later tag, so I'll just try to get through these relatively quickly. So prompt number 1 is a classic book that you've been meaning to read forever but haven't read yet. So for this one, I have Goethe's Faust. So I have part 1 and part 2 here, typically on point for me in different editions that don't match. But so I've always heard about Faust, and I've always obviously been interested in sort of the lore behind it. But I think in a grand sense, my understanding of it is essentially about an individual who is sort of in a good place in life, but also dissatisfied with his life, and ultimately makes this bargain with Mephistopheles, who is the devil, to kind of find untold riches and splendors and things beyond his ordinary life. But you know, like they say, when you make a deal with the devil, we kind of all know how that goes. So yeah, I don't know too much of the specifics about it, but the overarching story idea of kind of dissatisfaction in life and trying to make a deal with the devil to experience something better, only to then realize that you were better off as you were in the first place. It's an eternal kind of timeless story idea for me. It's something that I've seen recur in other art that I've been really interested in. So I've always been interested to read Faust. So I have part 1 in the Bantam Classic edition, and then I have part 2 in the Penguin Classic edition. So yeah, I don't know why I always seem to go out of my way to mash together different editions of things that don't match, but it kind of adds to the fun of it. So this one has the German and the English in there. This is translated by Peter Salm. And then the Penguin Classic edition, this is part 2 of Faust. This is translated by Philip Wayne, and this is just the English in here. So yeah, another thing that drew me back to wanting to read Faust very strongly recently was I'm a fan of the band Radiohead, and especially one of their albums, In Rainbows, and it came out at a kind of formative time for me musically and in my life, and so I always loved it. There's a song on there that talks about Mephistopheles and has some lyrical allusions to Faust. At least it always seemed that way. And I recently I listened to a podcast breaking down that album in detail, song by song. It's called Dissect, is the podcast, and the host is really patiently goes through each song and each lyric and tries to kind of break it all down. And in breaking down In Rainbows, the album, there was a lot of discussion about Faust and some of the lyrical influences that seem to have worked their way in there. So it's a favorite album of mine, and I've always been interested in the story of Faust. And so once I listened to that podcast, I made it a point to make sure I kept my eyes open for copies of these, and I found these too. Again, they don't match, but I'd like to get to Faust at some point. And then prompt 2 is a book on your shelf that you haven't read yet. So before I did this tag, I went through my physical bookshelves here and tried to count up the number of books that I haven't read, and I came up with 40. I accepted from that a couple short story volumes and a couple sort of classic type works that I've dabbled around in. I've read some parts of them but haven't finished them. There's a couple of those on my shelves that I didn't include in the count, but as far as just complete fresh start, I got to read it front to back, I counted 40 that I haven't read. So to get this one in classic me fashion, I went ahead and ran the random number generator, and to see what it got, and it got Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So this is a book on my shelf I haven't read yet. I did read 1984 earlier this year and really enjoyed that, and I always kind of inevitably think of Brave New World in the same vein as 1984. They always seem to be talked about together, so I've always wanted to check this one out. So the third question is a book you've got recently that you haven't read yet, and I tried to remember the most recent sort of just quick grab that I did at a bookshop or a thrift shop lately, and that I think was this one. So I mentioned this in a recent video when I was talking about Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I mentioned that there was another book of his that I've always heard about as even more intense and even more enthralling. And in that video, I actually made a little slip up and referred to this book as having to do with the author's climbing up of Mount Rushmore. So let me go ahead and fix the record and set the record straight once and for all. This is Into Thin Air, which discusses Jon Krakauer's expedition up Mount Everest. So let's just not go ahead and make that mistake again. So are there climbing expeditions up Mount Rushmore? I don't know. Actually, is that a thing? That would be interesting to see which kind of president you would attack first in the climb. But anyway, Into Thin Air by Krakauer. Once I did read Into the Wild this year and enjoyed it. I like to do that too when I pick out books to add to the TBR. Sort of like companions from the same author, or even just like natural follow-ups to read from an author that I do like. So having read this one, Into the Wild, it seemed to be a good idea to grab this one. And I think it's the most recent sort of book I just saw out there on a shelf and picked up. So I'm looking forward to Into Thin Air. Next is a book you've had forever but haven't read yet. So this one's going to be a little bit of a book you've had forever, got a little bit into, really enjoyed a part of years ago, and then never got back to, which is, this probably could have been talked about as a classic book that I haven't read also. But I did get somewhat through Paradise Lost by John Milton some years ago now. And basically what I can remember about this is it was certainly a struggle with some of the language, but the ideas in here and some of the passages were beautiful and really striking to me. And I've always wanted to complete it, so I got this version of it, the Dover Thrift Edition here, years ago, a long time ago. And it includes notes by John A. Himes. So even though it's a thrift edition, there are a significant chunk of notes here in the back. There's a big section of notes, I think, which I don't remember having those the first time I tried to read this, so that I think that'll be helpful with getting back to it. But yeah, I started this a long time ago, and I've had this copy forever to try to finish it, and I really need to do that. The one thing I can remember very strongly about reading a part of this all that time ago is, you know, kind of fighting through the difficult language and trying to make sense of it. And then I remember a really incredible feeling of getting to the part early on in this saga when Lucifer is falling from heaven. And I remember getting to that part and the language started coming together to me that oh my God, I'm actually about to read this part of Lucifer falling from heaven. And the language was amazing, and I couldn't believe I was actually reading that. So I don't know why I haven't finished it off at this point, but I would really like to recapture that feeling. And then the next prompt is a book a friend recommended, but you haven't read. So I don't have a ton of people that, you know, recommend books to me in my real life, but one that does come to mind that somebody recommended, and I have a picture of it here on the iPad, was this one, A Little Life by Hanye Yanagihara, and Yanagihara, I believe, sorry. I've seen this cover all over the place. It's kind of striking cover. So basically, my limited knowledge of this is that, you know, it deals with a gay man who is subjected to incredibly cruel amounts of abuse, essentially. The person that recommended this one to me recommended it in the sense of, it was one of those where the person said, I'm having trouble reading a little bit after this book because it was so intense and it was so moving that nothing else is quite matching up with this experience right now for me. So that's how this was presented to me by that person. I didn't officially add it to my TBR because, as I've said before, I sort of don't add books that are recommended to my TBR. I sort of just let them come to me in feelings and little instincts. But what's interesting about this one is the only thing I can say about this is, discouragingly, I have read so many reviews and criticisms and negative comments about this book, and they all seem to universally use the same term, which is trauma porn, which is a term I've never heard before looking into this book. And I really don't, it seems a little weird and like almost coordinated in a sense that every time I read a bad review or a bad comment about this book, the person seems to say that it's trauma porn. It just seems a little inauthentic that to be labeled so strongly with the same phrase by everybody I've read talking about this. So when I see that kind of thing, it actually draws me a little closer towards a book, because when I see like trends in reactions like that, and it almost seems like a fad a little bit to call this book quote unquote trauma porn. That's all I have to say about this, because whenever I think about this book or see it discussed online, that term just seems to come up, and it's weird to me. I don't know why. So, but this was recommended very strongly by someone, and you know, I would be interested at one point to try to go ahead and read that one. The next question is a book that you're procrastinating on. So for this one, I went with Walden by Henry David Thoreau, and the reasoning behind choosing this one is sort of, I did start this one a long time ago, and it was like kind of the only book I've ever read to that point where I read it in an e-copy. And actually it was on the iPad here that I started reading Walden, you know, quite a few years back. And it sticks out in my mind because it was one of the only books that I ever got into the whole annotating and highlighting thing, like reading on an e-reader kind of thing. And I put some effort into that. I remember taking some notes and annotating it with some highlighting and stuff, which I was enjoying doing. I got a decent way through it, and then, as technology seems to do for me, one day it just was wiped off of my iPad. I had it in the Books app on the iPad, and then it just disappeared one day. I don't know, something with the syncing, and I lost the notes and everything like that. So it was kind of discouraging and disappointing. And I think for that reason, that negative kind of experience of how that book got away from me back then, it's made me put off returning to it in some sense. But there really, you know, shouldn't be any reason for that. But I never had a physical copy of it until pretty recently, when I grabbed this copy as part of a box set. So yeah, I really did love what I was reading of Walden. And here's the table of contents here, if you can see that. I want to say I was probably somewhere around the bean field. I think I remember reading about the bean part, and I think that's about where I left off. So maybe a third of the way through, and certainly not a lot of reason why I haven't jumped back into this one. But like I said, I lost my digital copy of it, and then it kind of put a sour taste in my mouth for that. So I've been meaning to get back to Walden to finish it off, but I'm going to stick to the hard copy this time. The last thing here is the next book on your TBR. So as I've said before on the channel, I do have a TBR, and I pick my next read off of it randomly. I don't, you know, do anything other than random number generation to grab my next book off my TBR. And so I figured it'd be good to do that live here on video. I have a book that I'm about 2/3 of the way through right now, which I'll be finishing sometime soon. Usually I wait till I finish reading a book to run the number generator and pick my next one, but for purposes of this tag, I thought I would go ahead and do it now. So yeah, so here is Random Reading Pathway. So here is, this is the random number generator that I use. It's random.org. Like I said earlier, I have 40 books that I counted up on my shelves here that I need to get to next. So I'm just going to run this live and see what happens. So I have 1 through 40 in there, and let's see what I get if I run this. what does that say backwards? 16. Okay. So my next book on my TBR will be book number 16 on my shelves. I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a second, go grab that book, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I went ahead and found book number 16 on my shelves. And so my next book on my TBR will be Friday Night Lights by H.G. Bissinger. I've talked about this at a decent length in a video I posted, let's see, it was Nonfiction November Contenders and Selection. I'm pretty sure is when I talked about this, so if you want to hop back to that video, and I think I have a chapter in there talking about this book, but basically it's a nonfiction account of the high school football team in Odessa, Texas, from sometime in the 80s, the Permian Panthers, and it's the inspiration for the movie Friday Night Lights, which is one of my favorite sports movies of all time. So yeah, I've always kind of been interested to see the source material for that movie, and yeah, so this is exciting. I just found out in real time on the video here that I will be reading this next. So I will continue with nonfiction. My current read is a nonfiction book, and it looks like I'll be continuing with another one. So that's been a pretty good trend lately. So next up on the TBR, Friday Night Lights. And then the last part of this is just to go ahead and tag some other people. So I've definitely seen this BookTube tag cycling through quite a bit, so I think a lot of people have had a chance to do it. I'll go ahead and see if I can find some channels that I don't see having done it yet, and if I can, I'll drop some tags to them in the description. So that's the I'll get around to it later tag. Thanks again to everybody that tagged me for this, and I'll be back soon with some more updates. Thanks.